Hey, good morning, and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club, the Kids Edition, my favorite one, for the month of July 2024. We've got a really fun book this month. It's Camp Prodigy by Carolyn Palmer, who is right there. Hello, Carolyn.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. We're talking about comics, so I can't be doing
Yeah,
anything but great, I think.
I know.
Yeah. So let me start. We always start with the same question because I really think this question gets to the core of this. Why comics? Of
Mm.
all the things that you could be doing to express yourself, what is it about comics that speaks to you, particularly given how labor intensive making comics is?
Yeah. Well, as a kid, even in elementary school or so, I always knew I wanted to be like an artist when I grew up. That was like the whole career goal. And then I ended up like starting to read comics in around like late elementary school. And it just like totally caught my eye because I had before, been interested in like, oh, it's fun to draw and it's fun to like write short stories and stuff. But suddenly it was like, oh, you can put them together? What? So I got really into it. And there's other like sort of variations of I feel like the art and like writing combination. You have like animation, you have like illustrated books and stuff, but comics always felt like the perfect blend to me because like you can just each aspect is like you can depend on it for like to hold its own weight and strength. When you if you can't express something with the art, then you can just do it in writing, and if you can't express something in writing, then you can just draw it. So it felt like a perfect combination.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What you said that you kind of got turned on, as it were, in elementary school. What book, what comic was it that was the first one? Not necessarily maybe the first one that you read, but the first one that
Yeah,
unlocked you. You know?
yeah. My I had like obviously known about like superhero comics and stuff, but they never really caught my eye.
Sure.
Um, and so the first thing that really got me was during summer camp. A friend of mine uh, was like really into manga,
Hmm.
and I was like, oh well, I think they're all just guys with big chins, but it sounds interesting what you're saying. So she brought me one to read, and then I got hooked, and I read through that like whole series. And then since then I've it's not like I've only read manga, but that was the probably the starting point, and I've gotten more into like graphic novels and stuff like that as the
Yeah.
years went.
Yeah. Nice. What was that first manga series?
It was called Inuyasha. It's a little bit old, so
Yeah.
if this is the kids group, they probably don't know it, but yeah.
I mean, it's still in print, so you
Hmm.
know it's
Yeah,
it's
it was
and it's
popular.
great material too. Yeah, that's a really good
Hmm.
comic. Neat. Um,
Hmm.
uh, did you go to school for learning to write and draw? What did you what's your path to there?
Yeah. Well, I went to in like middle and high school. It was this like arts magnet school,
Oh, nice.
so like a little bit getting into it there. And then I did actually go to college for comics. It was like the major called sequential arts, so like obviously art and sequence. So I did get to like major in comics in college, and I definitely learned a lot there.
Yeah, I'm assuming that the art magnet school didn't have any kind of comics program or any kind of comics
Yeah.
track or anything like that. Yeah.
It was like pretty much like there was like art classes, dance classes, drama, so sort of
Yeah.
basic, just like one all grouped together.
Yeah.
But there was a comic club
Okay.
that met after school every week, so I did join that.
Nice. Nice.
Mhm.
Um, and when you told your teachers in the magnet school that you were interested in comics, were they positive about that, or were they like, no, you should do fine art?
It depended on the teacher.
Yeah.
I wasn't like, at the time, I wasn't saying, I never said like, oh, I want to draw comics when I grow up, even though I did want to draw comics when I grew up. I just, I had fun creating like whichever sort of art there was. But then whenever there was like a we got a project or something where it was like we had free reign, it was like, how can I turn this into comics? So I would always turn it into comics.
Yeah.
So some teachers were like, oh, you're probably not going to be able to like make a career out of that. But I never really felt like as though I was being sincerely discouraged or anything. So I never felt like as though they were saying like, you should stop this right now. Because after I made them, they were probably like, okay, well, it's fine.
Yeah. Well, and more than that, they were wrong.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Love it. Okay, so where did this book in particular come from? What was?
Mm-hmm.
I assume that it's from your own experiences in those art magnet schools. Is that?
Bit, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because I obviously I was like mostly focused on art, but they did have orchestra like classes there, so that was like my sort of second focus. And then going into college, the college I went to, it didn't really have an orchestra major. It was like it was hard to sort of keep that up. So I like pretty much kind of stalled out on that for a while. But then when I was starting to try and like get a book deal and things like that, I was thinking, maybe I can like have another homage to, the orchestra that I was all involved in, like sort of bring those two parts together for this first book.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was really fascinated by the fact that these kids are all, well, they're all prodigies. They're all super good at this. Because that's not usually the narrative that one gets, right? Like normally it's like, oh, I'm being told that I have to do this, but I'm not actually not any good at it, and I don't really want to do it, right? Like, so to reverse that, I thought was a very interesting choice. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah. I did think it would be interesting, like since the main character at the start, they like obviously improve throughout the book, but at the start is like has pretty much just started playing the viola, is not very good, and then is inspired by this other kid their age who is a prodigy, who is like having the opportunity to like play solo concerts and things like that, but who is sort of having a crisis of confidence. I thought it was an interesting combination to have one character who was so skilled be less willing to play, and the other who was like really just starting out, didn't know very much, who was like really ambitious. So I that sort of concept sprung into my mind, and then I was like, oh, this could like be a book. I could turn this into something.
Yeah. I liked the fact that one of the messages of the book was that it's okay not to be what people expect of you. And I think that's something that maybe kids don't hear enough. That you can start to do something and then you can change your mind, and it's okay. Particularly when you're a kid, it's okay to change your mind about where you're going to go and what you're going to do and how you want to build your life. So I was quite impressed with that as a thing.
Thank you. Yeah. I definitely wanted to like give off that impression, because I feel like even in as early as middle school, kids are already getting pressured to like, oh, if you're going to learn something, you have to like be really good at it. You have to get good at it. You have to have root for the best grades. You have to try and be like the best artist or the best musician. I feel like there's a lot of sort of like, if you aren't the best, then like, why are you even doing this thing, or like messaging out there, which I feel like is sort of like totally, should not be how people think of, like being creative or learning. I think it's all about, when it comes to like making art, making music, anything like that, I feel like the most important thing, especially for a kid, is to enjoy yourself. So even if you aren't like technically skilled at whatever you're doing, I feel like as long as you're having fun, then maybe the technical skill will come later, maybe it won't, but the most important thing is that you're enjoying yourself.
Yeah, no, very much so. I remember seeing a lot of this when my own son was in middle school.
Mm,
That they were already trying to kind of steer the kids into, oh, if you want this kind of career, then you must go to one of these kind of schools, and
yeah.
so therefore you have to do all of these things. And I don't think the kids are ready to make those decisions in a lot of cases.
Mhm.
I mean, that's part of being a kid, right?
Yeah.
Is figuring out what you do like and what you don't like and what you want to be.
Hmm.
Anyway, I was glad to see that. So, uh, did you do comics before this? Did you do like a web comic or something like that?
Hmm. Yeah, I actually started a webcomic. I actually started a webcomic like I think 2016, like when I was in high school. And
Wow.
I'm still working on that today,
Oh, nice.
actually.
Very
So
nice.
yeah, I've been pretty much doing comics. As a kid, it was like stuff that I didn't put online. And then in high school, I started putting more things online. But this is like sort of the big debut into the publishing world. But yeah, I do have other things that like, on my website or on my social media that have popped up over the years. Mhm.
What's the URL for that?
Well, well, you can pretty much find me anywhere if you go to like my social media. I have an Instagram, I have a Twitter, and then I like put in the links, my other links to everything else. So the username I use is 1010 Littlefoot, except it's spelled Lil, Lil. Hmm. So yeah, if
One
you just
zero
go to
one
any
zero
of
little.
those, then you can click on a link and it'll take you to all the rest of my stuff.
Very good.
Hmm.
Very good. Just for the people at home. That's why
Yeah,
it was. You know.
come check me
Um,
out.
yeah. No. Absolutely. Um, did you? How did the step go to you pitching to a publisher? Did you find yourself an agent, or did a publisher see the comics that you were doing online and approach you?
I did find myself an agent.
Okay.
I had been hearing more and more about that in college, that it was recommended, so because if you have an agent, it's a little bit easier to like navigate the process. And for me, that was like a great idea because all I really wanted to do was draw instead of worry about like negotiating things.
Sure.
So there was like a Twitter event, I think, where you could like use a hashtag on a certain day and post like some pages of your like pitch or your like comic ideas. And if an agent liked it, like, or, hearted the post or anything, then they wanted you to reach out to them. So it was a lot easier than I think some people have, because I luckily got multiple hearts and I was able to find an agent by doing that.
Nice.
Hmm.
Nice. So you actually had some competition looking for you.
So yeah,
Nice.
I was able to pick out like whoever I thought fit me best, which was very nice.
Right. That's like a real kind of relief rather than having to go, oh, I've got to go with this
Mhm.
one because they're the only one who reached out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, or having to like look up individually, like scour through Google, like who's open for submissions and who's this and who's that. So I definitely had it easy doing the that a Twitter event thing.
Yeah. That's nice. That's nice. And so then you put together a pitch
Hmm.
for this book in particular, or was there something else you were doing at the same time?
There was the first one pitch I put together was actually for a different idea, and that like there was interest. There was like almost it like sort of almost went somewhere, but then it ended up not.
Mhm.
So after that, me and my agent were talking about like some of the feedback we got, and he said like, oh, maybe like a genre like this. People were asking to like possibly see stuff like that from you,
Uh-huh.
and so I brainstormed and I thought about like other ideas that I'd had on the back burner, and then built this one up. And yeah, it got a good amount of like interest. So
Nice.
now become a book.
Be
Hmm.
in that period between the first pitch and the second pitch,
Hmm.
did you get discouraged at all, or were you like, okay, now I've got to try twice as hard?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I had a sort of a different like art gig happening, so I wasn't like as worried about like, oh shoot, now I'm like on the clock. Like if I don't get this, then I have to you know focus on like get into a different career or anything. I didn't have to really worry so much about that. But it was like it was more like a like oh darn it, well I'll get him next time sort of
Nice.
feeling.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
How big of a pitch is it?
Yeah, I mean typically you have to put in like uh different layers. Like there's the first page pretty much is like uh the elevator pitch, so very short, and then they get a little bit of a longer summary like the next page. And then you give like your full like sort of chapter by chapter summary, and you also include some like sample pages. So I feel like with a pitch it's pretty much like you start with like the hook almost, so that if the editor you're showing it to, it gets their attention, then they can like flip to the next page and they're like, oh, I see a little bit more. And if they're still interested, they flip to the next page. Oh, I see a little bit more. And then they get to check out like your art and stuff as well at the end and make their decision. So mine was, I think they can typically range, but they're usually like a, solid several pages of a PDF, like about 15, 20.
Okay.
I guess including the sample pages too might also be change it up a little bit. But yeah, it's like a little small like pamphlet sort of thing.
Sure.
Size. Mm-hmm.
How many pages of comics did you do for this?
For
like
the pitch?
Yeah, for the pitch.
I did about like 10, 11.
10. Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I just pretty much I did like I picked a scene sort of, and so when the scene like I felt like it was a good stopping point, I was like, okay, well then that's how many pages I'll do.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Did you end up using that same thing in the book, or did you redraw it?
I redrew it, but some of the pages are pretty similar. Like I think I started pretty much from the beginning, so that very first scene I changed up, but then afterwards there's a tiny bit of the next scene that ended up pretty similar. So, I redrew the whole thing, but like some of it was like I looked back on like the old pages I drew and I was like, oh, I pretty much don't have to change these that much. Oh, easy to turn right into the next thing.
Yeah. Once you settled on which publisher you thought was going to do the best with the book, what was the next step for you? Was there any kind of development process with the editor where you guys talked about the story and making changes, or were they like just confident, no, go ahead and start working?
It was pretty much sort of a combination of both. You sort of start like from the ground up with the story, I think. So we talked about like sort of the biggest edits to like how the story would flow, like maybe add in a scene here, do this or that. And so I redid sort of a longer, like more in-depth summary. And once they'd checked off on that, then it was like, oh, okay, well now I will like go on to thumbnailing, which is like really simple sketches. And so then like they can check over that. And if they have any edits, there's not as big as the original ones. And so then I go on to like, sketching and inking, and every phase sort of it's like smaller and smaller details. So maybe at the beginning it's like, oh, I think this character should have this kind of like development instead. But then by the end it's like, oh, like maybe change the color on this one tiny piece of a page because it's like a little bit unclear. So it sort of was a nice like sort of focusing of the story, so that I didn't have to change a lot of like really big things. The further on I get and the more complicated it gets, it was like all the big things were sort of grouped at the beginning. So we like sort of eased into it and then like just kept going.
Well, especially with comics, once you started drawing it, it's really, really hard to make changes.
It's hard to change.
It's possible. I mean, you can do it, but it's not like a book where you're just changing a word, I don't know. That's kind of funny. Did you just go from the outline to your thumbnails, or did you write a full script?
Some people write a script. For me, I just went to thumbnails. That was like sort of combined with the script.
Yeah.
Because I personally like in my mind, they're always like tied together, like the dialogue and the art. So if I were to do a script first off, I would be thinking the whole time like, well, I already know exactly how this looks, so why am I describing what the panel is, like what's happening in the panel, when I could just draw it and save myself extra time. Because yeah, like how I was saying earlier with comics, it was almost like the perfect sort of amalgamation of words and art. So I was like, oh, I don't know how to describe this panel, but I can draw it.
Yeah.
So I said like, yeah, it's easiest for me to just go straight to the thumbnails, and they gave me the okay.
Yeah. It's one of the things I very much love about comics and talking to comics creators is that everybody has a different manner of working.
Yeah.
Which you don't usually see. You don't usually see that in prose. You certainly don't see that in things like film, because there's so many other people involved.
Yeah.
But I love that in comics, some people do it script first. Some people just thumbnail. I've told this story a couple of times. I even have spoken to a cartoonist who does coloring first.
Wow.
Puts
Yeah.
down the color on the page, and that suggests what they're going to draw on that page, which I thought was fascinating. You kind of can't see other media working that same way.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the strengths of comics, quite frankly.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, especially when you have graphic novels, because when you think about like, DC or Marvel comics, a lot of the times there are like different phases. Like somebody does the letters, somebody does the writing, someone does the art. But when you have graphic novels, a lot of the times there's like maybe one or two, like it's a sort of less people involved in the team almost. And then sometimes there's even only one person, like there was with me pretty much.
I would say the majority of people I speak to are probably cartoonists. As opposed to a writer and an artist. I think that's a big part of it too. So this is your first graphic novel, and you had been doing web comics before. Web comics are typically done in sort of 3 and 4, maybe 8-page chunks before you upload it. What was the difference for you between working in that smaller, shorter form versus I've got a 240 some odd page book that I've got to fill up?
Yeah, there was definitely a difference when it comes to webcomics. For me, at least, like I've just been like publishing it on my own, like sort of self-publishing. So there was no like editor. I'm literally the only person who is like working on it. So I don't have to like cater to anyone, and I also don't have like any, anyone to catch if I make a mistake. So that's an interesting difference. It's nice to work with an editor, but it's also nice to like have full free reign. So I like that I'm able to do both. And then obviously in terms of length, when it comes to webcomics, a lot of the time, actually before I got into this graphic novel, a lot of my like story ideas were like pretty sprawling, long things where I'm like, okay, there's going to be like all these chapters. And like, so with my webcomic and other things like that, it was always like just very, very, very long in my mind. But then obviously you have to chip away at it with every update. You get a little bit closer. So it was actually felt more like I had to like pare things down for the graphic novel, because I was like, okay, this is going to be like a one and done story. I almost thought of it as if like my typical ideas was like a TV show, and then this was almost like a movie. So you have to like tell the full scope of the story within one book and make it satisfying and like, be packing what you can, but like cut out what is too like derailing. So it was interesting, but I am pretty satisfied with the results.
Yeah, very much. Thinking of yourself at the beginning of the project as you first started thumbnailing versus you at page, let's call it 240, just
Yeah.
to make life easier. How did your pacing or storytelling change, do you think, over that time? Because I assume that it did, because you're building up muscles as you go along, right?
Yeah. It was interesting because, again, I guess the difference between this and webcomics is typically if it's a webcomic, then it's like, okay, well, I have like a week or 2 weeks and I do this batch of pages from beginning to end, like from very first sketching to final. But with a graphic novel, it was like I have a year or so to start from, like just like do things almost in stages. Like I'm going to take X number of months to sketch out all the pages at the same time. And then after I'm done with that, I take X amount of months to ink all the pages at the same time. Whereas usually it's like I do one page like beginning to end almost. It was like just spread out over the course of the year or so that I worked on it. So that was interesting. It was like part of me was thinking like, oh, I miss inking. Like I wish I could get to that already.
Right.
And then once I got there, I was thinking to myself like, oh, I miss sketching. I wish I had like been able to like stay in that phase a little longer, things like that. So but it was also then at the end, once you have everything come together at the same time, you're like, ooh, it's like everything feels like pretty consistent and it looks really good.
Yeah. No, that's neat. How long did it take you to do your thumbnails?
Thumbnailing, it didn't take me very long because they're very like simple looking. You have to like put in thought into them, like extra thought. So I think for some people it actually takes a little bit longer than the rest of the process. But for me, I've just been doing comics so long that it was sort of straightforward. Like, okay, this is how I imagine it, and okay, like we're good to go, sort of thing. There were some that I had to, change either on my editor's like notes or because I was looked back on it and I was like, oh, it doesn't read very well. But thumbnailing for me didn't take too long. I think it was probably a couple months, maybe 2 or 3 months. I don't really remember exactly, but it wasn't too long.
So let's see. That means that you were doing 2 or 3 pages a day,
Well,
on average?
maybe it was faster than that. I don't remember exactly how long it took, but I do remember at the time my goal was about like, I think 5 to 10 pages a day.
Wow. Okay.
And then but I did, take time off on the weekend.
Yeah.
So maybe it was, more like if I ended up with like 40 or 50 or so a week, I think probably closer to like 1 or maybe a little like 1.5 or 2 months.
Okay. Wow. That's a pretty fast pace. Yeah. Because I definitely talk to people who are like, yeah, no, I thumbnail like a page, maybe a page and a half a day.
Yeah. For me, it was the other bits that like took a bit longer time, but for the thumbnails at least, I was able to like just like toss them onto the page right from my head.
Yeah. All right. Were you thinking in terms of scenes as you're doing? Yeah.
Yeah, that too. Because if I was done, like during one day or something, if I finished up a scene, I would feel like, okay, I'm satisfied. This is good for the day. And so that was how I would keep track of them almost. Like I would be like, okay, by the end of this week, I want to get through like these scenes. And then I would, that would be like my goal for the time.
Yeah. You were kind of talking about how the editing process was kind of an inverted pyramid, that it was a lot of stuff at the beginning and then it stopped being as much. How much in that thumbnail stage actually changed?
Not too much. It was mostly like things like, I think you should like expand this to be a few more pages, like get more into it. But I think I had a good sense for the thumbnailing because I didn't get that many edits on like how the page flowed or like this panel, that panel. I pretty much got for the most part, a thumbs up. So I was happy with how that went. I think it's just because I've drawn comics for so long that like it's sort of gotten built into my mind, like the sort of how composition should work, how like this and that. I feel like my sense for pacing is now like almost like a sort of just a like I can turn it on and it's like easy to just put things down onto paper in a way that I feel like they can be read well.
Yeah. When you were doing you're still doing as
Yeah.
you're doing your web comic, are you working in landscape format or are you working in portrait format?
I am working. It's kind of they look like I think a lot of webcomics these days are like scroll format.
Yeah.
But back when I started, most of them were like just this typical page, like as if you could collect them in a book someday. That you could just literally take the image and like sort of stick it on the page. So I still work pretty much like that, where it looks like a full page, like all the just similar to Camp Prodigy. But I have thought about like, hey, maybe after I like finish this, or maybe if I ever get the opportunity, it might be fun to do a scrolling comic or something like that. So it typically is like, I guess, portrait sort of style, like your average page. But I do think when people work with like scrolling comics like that are vertical or horizontal or anything like that, I think that's pretty fun.
Absolutely. The so web comics versus print comics, the in web comics you're usually only seeing one page at a time. In print comics though, you've got pagination and you've got the page turn. How much were you thinking about that page turn? Sort of the, when you get to the right page, like there should be a beat there. And were you thinking about it all the way along, or did you grow into it as you did more of the work? Did you understand the question?
Yeah. Sorry, there might have been a little bit of a delay if I wasn't answering right away.
No. It was more. I wasn't quite sure if I asked the question.
Oh no, yeah, I think I get what you're saying. I think I was when I was doing the thumbnails, I took a little sketchbook so that I would know like to keep in mind page turns and stuff. So I just did it like not digitally, like physically on this little sketchbook, and I was like, oh, this would be a good time for like something to happen. So I kept it in mind. I have done those web comics for quite a while, but I've also done a lot of just comics that I did that maybe haven't been posted or this or that I just did in sketchbooks. Like in high school, there was like a sort of almost a multi-volume comic I did that I just did the whole time in sketchbooks. So I was able to I feel like I got a good, like sense for page turning doing that stuff as well.
Yeah. That sounds good. Okay, so after you've got your thumbnails, they've been approved. Now you get into the actual draftsmanship. You're doing your pencils. How long did that process take you?
That took longer. That took I think that might have taken the longest, actually, out of all the time I had. So it was several months. I don't know exactly how many. Maybe more like 4 or even 5.
Yeah.
But yeah, sense. I think that took the longest because it was like when I'm inking, since I already had the sketch pages, it was like very easy to just go right over those. But sketching, I had to like look up reference. I had to like draw all the backgrounds, or if there were crowd shots, I'd have to like put in all these characters in the background. Yeah. So I think that took the most time actually out of all of the phases.
That makes sense. Inking was quick, you said. Was it also kind of in that 1 to 2 month range?
Probably more like 2 to 3, I think. Okay. Thumbnails were definitely the quickest. But yeah, inking didn't take me as long because I had the sketches as reference. And then coloring, I think, even may have been a little bit shorter than inking, which was pretty much the final step or almost the final. But yeah, so those ones went a little faster, which was nice.
Yeah. You let's talk about the lettering actually before we go to the coloring. This is a font, obviously.
Yes.
Is it a font based on your handwriting, or is it just an off the shelf?
Nope, it's based off my handwriting.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Did you do it yourself?
I do have one that I made myself at some point, but for this, the like team at Simon & Schuster's asked like, "Oh, do you have a font, or do you want us to make one, or this or that?" And since the old one I had, I didn't know if the file, like the font file, was going to be like easily transferable, because I
Right.
kind of did it, pretty cheaply.
Sure.
Like I used just a very like a site that got it done in like 2 seconds practically. And I thought also like, oh, it might be a good chance to refine it a little. So I said,
Yeah.
I do have one, but it might be nice to make a new one.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we ended up making a new one that I gave to them page of like how I'd drawn all the letters and all that. We actually ended up like refining it multiple times, like redoing it a few
Yeah.
times to make sure that it looked like the like line weight looked right with the actual pages, things
Yep.
like that. So I tried not to be too picky about it, but I think I was a little bit picky. But then in the end, it looks really nice. So I guess it all was for the best.
Yeah, it does. At what stage are you doing your lettering? Are you doing it before or after you've started inking?
I put in like the where the dialogue and the lettering would be as early as in the thumbnails.
Okay.
But then for the rest of the process drawing, I just drew. So then the lettering was pretty much the final thing. It might have been happening at the same time as the coloring. So that was pretty much the final thing. I like drew word balloons and whatnot, and then I sent the files over to my team, and my designer did the actual inputting the words in the text.
Yeah.
So, and then if
Did
there
you?
were like any problems fitting it, like she would tell me like, "Oh, could you make this word balloon bigger? Or could you do this or that?" And so I was like, "Okay." So I would redo it and send it back over.
Well, that's what I'm going to ask you.
Yeah.
Like, how many times did you have to change the size of the balloon?
Luckily, there weren't too many, but I think it was mostly just that like there were a lot of little tweaks. So it was like even though compared to the actual number of pages, it was probably only like, I don't know, 10% of them I had to tweak. When you have to like comb through all of them, it's like, and then sometimes they send it back and they're like, oh, it's almost there. Could you give it a little bit more? So it was a little bit of like just a monotonous process. But in the end, that the fact that they looked good, I was like, yeah, okay, it's worth it.
Yeah. There's there's a reasonable amount of onomatopoeia, like when a clock goes bring or something like that. That's hand drawn on the art.
Yes, I did hand draw that on the art.
Okay. Just checking,
Yeah.
Like I say, everybody does it slightly differently. So
yeah. I've definitely seen people do like the onomatopoeia as like text that they overlay. And I think that's nice. But like for me, I've always preferred when like you can tell that the artist like hand drew it in. Like there's a sense of, I feel like there's more of a sort of organic sense almost. Like sometimes the letters will have more variation. So that's always been my preference. So I was like, well, I guess I just have to draw them in.
Yeah. Well, that brings me to a question that I didn't ask earlier, and I don't know why I didn't ask this. Are you a digital person or a physical person?
Sort of a combination of both. I tend to do. I was pretty much going back and forth for this graphic novel actually, because the thumbnails I started just physically, like analog, and then I sketched things digitally so that it would be easy to move things around. And then I printed all those out and I inked traditionally. And then I scanned them back in and I colored digitally. So it was pretty much just
Oh,
flip
wow.
back and forth.
Wow.
Mhm.
That sounds like a lot of work,
Yeah.
going back and forth like that.
Yeah, but I tried to pick the way that I felt like would both look the nicest to me and also be the fastest. um, like for example, like with the inking, a lot of people ink digitally, but because you can always hit the undo button, sometimes you get really caught up in it, and then suddenly you've spent 5 minutes redrawing one line.
Yeah.
So for me, I was like, I don't want to just get all caught up and like just focus on this one line for like the whole day. So I printed them out, and then if you mess up, it's like, well, I guess I can fix that in post. Like, but you are sort of forced to keep going, and I felt like that helped me go through the inking pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Kept you focused too, yeah?
Yeah. And then, obviously I went back to digital for coloring because I felt like that was also the fastest and also that it looked the best.
Mm-hmm.
I've never really gotten the hang of traditional coloring as much. I do it for fun, but when it comes to the comics and stuff, I'm like, oh, I like it better when it's got like that pop, like that bright color.
Yeah. How long did it take you to color the book?
Yeah, I think probably a couple months. It was a little bit less than the time I spent inking.
Yeah.
Um, but more than I expected, which shouldn't be a surprise because I think I always color for a little bit longer than I expect. Um, because, you have to, especially for this book, there were a lot of details, like small characters in the background, this and that. So the coloring took a little bit longer than I expected, but not too long. And then I ended up satisfied with it at the end. I feel like I always like experiment a little with the coloring, especially like on my own personal like web comics or other projects. So for this one, it was nice to be able to do it all in one so that it would have more consistency.
Yeah. You've got a lot of purples, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
kind of peaches and oranges in here.
Mm-hmm.
What led you to those particular colors, or was it just that felt right?
I think it was, well, the main characters, I tried to give all of them like a sort of, I don't know, like theme color, like a color that was you would see in pretty much all of their outfits and everything like
Yeah.
that. So I just selected all those and I tried to make sure they looked nice together. And then aside from that, I would build the background almost around those colors. So they ended up with a lot of like uh, I ended up also trying to keep them somewhat consistent. So the purples and like warm colors probably are the most notable. I tend to have color preferences even just on my
Cool.
own. Like I'm like, oh, I don't like dark yellow or I don't like yellow green so much, or I try to avoid like sort of magenta pink sometimes. So I think those preferences always pop up whenever I'm coloring something. So,
Yeah.
but it does, I think, tend to help with consistency. So hopefully it's not, I think other people sometimes make more bolder choices with colors, but I feel like it turned out well.
Yeah, no, it did.
Mm-hmm.
I think it did. When you got to the end of the whole process,
Mm-hmm.
how did you feel? Did you, because it's probably the biggest thing that you've done in a short period of time.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. At the time, it was like, when you're finishing things up, like there's can be like little fiddly bits that you are still working on a little bit. So it like sort of gradually, you're like, okay, and now I'm done. Oh, but wait, there's one more thing. Okay, now I'm done. So it was a little bit. It wasn't quite like okay, and now I put down my pen and the whole thing's like I know for sure that it's completely done with. It was a little bit more of a slow, like easing out of the process. But me and my family definitely did get a cake and celebrate.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. It was. I think the most notable moment for me was like getting the first copies of the book. like in reading all the way through them, I was like, wow, this is really a book. Like,
Yeah.
So that's when I think it like hit me the most. I was like, oh my gosh, like it looks so professional. Like you can read it from front to back.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel as though like there was a weight off you now that you were done with the 240 pages in approximately a year, it sounds like?
Yeah. I think most people, most people will take 2 years to do the full thing.
Yeah.
But for me, with this one, since it was my debut, I was like, oh, I really just want to put it out there as soon as possible. So I said, like, I think we can do it in one. And then we ended up doing it in one. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but I've always worked pretty fast. So for me, at least, it was not too difficult. But if you're just starting in comics, you can chill out and just do the two.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when I finished it up, it was sort of like thank goodness, like I've accomplished the whole project. Everything went well. I turned it in on time. But I was also a little bit raring to go for the next. Mm-hmm.
Do you know what your next project is already? Are you already working on it, or?
Well, I don't know if I can say anything for sure.
Understood.
But everyone keep your eyes peeled.
Nice.
Because yeah, I do have an idea of what's coming next, and I'll probably talk about it more like on my social media and stuff within this sort of summer season, I think, probably.
Very nice. Are you already working on that project, or is it still you're waiting for someone to sign off on it?
I am, yeah, I'm sort of waiting in limbo a little bit right now.
Yep.
But I've been, I guess you could say, working on it because I've been brainstorming.
Sure, yeah. No, I mean that's when I meant work in that sense, I meant like, have you started
like writing,
thumbnailing,
typing things out?
right, like
yeah. I haven't started doing that yet because I am, I'm trying to be patient. But I've already been like, my brain is like jumping ahead of my patience. So I've been thinking all about how things will go.
Nice. Yeah, no, nice. There's no other question that I could ask that won't give something away there.
Yeah.
So, no, I won't.
Yeah. I could. I don't know how much I could say. I probably I could be less.
No, you probably shouldn't say. You probably shouldn't say anything because it's not. Till you have a signed contract, it's not an actual thing.
Yeah.
Is it another graphic novel? Actually, that's something I can ask.
Yes, it is.
Nice. Do you see yourself continuing to work on self-contained books like Camp Prodigy, or would you like to try your hand at something a little longer form?
I think I will I think I'll always like keep putting out a few self-contained things, but I do think it would be a lot of fun to do something where it's like got sequels and it's sort of like a more of a multi like book story at some point. I don't necessarily know when I might start doing that, but
Sure.
I always have like ideas on the back burner. So if the time ever seems right, then I feel like I could toss something out on the page and like work it into something nice.
Yeah. Where do you do your best brainstorming? Is it like some people like they do it in their sleep, some people do it in the shower, some people do it while they're exercising.
Yeah.
So what's it for you, Carolyn?
I think for me, typically it can be like there can be multiple areas in which I'm like, oh, I got a really good idea. But I think consistently where I do my best brainstorming is going on walks, because you are like, I think it's easy to like let your mind sort of zone out almost if you're doing like an activity that doesn't really take up much of your focus, but that keeps you occupied enough that you aren't like bored or you don't want to need to pull out your phone or anything. So just
Right.
walking around, it's like, oh, very simple. So I don't have to think about it. But then I can also think about all this other stuff, all these other ideas.
Yeah.
So that I think is typically the most consistent way for me to get some good brainstorming done.
Nice. You mentioned that your family got you a cake when you finished the book. What was their reaction to the book?
We actually, I let them like check out the pitch and all that, but then I was thinking like, then I asked them like, oh, do you want to like read it as I go, or do you want to wait and see the whole thing in its final glory? And they were all like, I really want to read it as you go, but if you want us to, we'll wait. So they were very eagerly anticipating like when we actually got the physical books. But then once we did, they all like zipped right through all the copies that we had. So yeah, they were very excited and supportive of me, which is nice. They
That's
got
great.
me
Yeah.
for multiple cakes at different times of the process. Like when I finished the pages, it's like, oh hey, let's get a dessert. And then once we get the actual books, it's like, okay, let's get another one. And then when the books come out, it's like, okay, well, let's do another celebration. So yeah, they were very supportive.
Nice. That sometimes a little bit of sugar can get you going.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, great. I really liked the book, and I think you did a really nice job on it. Particularly as a first graphic novel, it's it's a challenge. It's a little scary, and as I said, I thought the themes were very interesting, and the characters seemed rich, and you did good, Carolyn. This is good stuff. I like it a lot.
Thank you.
So just like the first question, I always ask the same question at the end, and it's about. So this is a series of interviews. We're about to start year 10 with next month's book. Next month's book is year 10 of this.
Wow.
So that means we've done at least 240 interviews with people over that time, so there's a lot of people who watch this series who want to make comics themselves, and who I hear from them that they're not always confident in their ability. They're not sure what they should do. They just don't know. They don't know if they have it or not. And so I always ask, if you were talking to someone who has an interest in comics but isn't sure, if they can do it, if they have the skill, if they have sort of the grit, I guess, even, right? Because it's an uphill battle. It took you a year to do this book, an entire year of your life put into this. So what would be the piece of advice to this neophyte? And it can be something physical, it can be something tangible, it can also be something emotional or spiritual. Just what would your piece of advice be?
I think my piece of advice would be that the sort of easiest way, I think, to get into comics is you don't have to worry about like the materials. You can just get copy paper. I used to draw on lined paper. You can just get copy paper and a pencil, and then that you should just do something completely self-indulgent. Just do whatever you think is the coolest, the most fun, the most dramatic, the most interesting, or the funniest, whatever you think is the comic you would want to read the most, and what you would enjoy drawing the most. I think that should be, some of your first stuff. Just whatever you think is cool. And you don't have to show it to anyone in case you're like worried about not measuring up. But I think that if you start making comics, multiple or just one long thing or just anything, whatever you make first should be something that you personally are catering to you yourself as the audience, that you think will be the most enjoyable to look back on and reread. Because if you enjoy what you're making, and if you enjoy the process of making it, I feel like that's like the spark that can carry you on if you want to try, learning more technical skill or getting into the industry or anything. it should always start from that spark of like, oh, this is so much fun drawing this thing that I think is really cool.
Great. I love that answer. I think that's a fantastic answer. Yeah, I think that's great. Well, very good. I've quite enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, me too.
Will you hold on a second, and I'll do just a little bit of business, and then we'll come back and we'll wrap up the show. All right?
Sounds great.
Give me 2 minutes to talk to the audience. Hello, audience. How are you? Thanks for watching. You've been. If you're sitting at home and you want something to read, and a lot of you do, I would thoroughly recommend Camp Prodigy. It's a very entertaining book that I think has some messages about making choices that maybe you're not seeing in other books, and you're going to get something pretty valuable out of this. So get a copy of this book. There's a button that you can press, and there'll be a URL down here at the bottom, and yada yada. You can buy it from us if you like. It helps us, but that's not really. I don't want to tell you. Let me make a couple thanks. The first thanks is to Ben, my son, who's been running the show. Thank you, Ben. You're great. And I want to thank Jordan, my producer, who does a bunch of backstage stuff that none of you see, but we absolutely couldn't do the show without him. I want to thank my staff. I want to thank Zoe and Kat and Katie and Max and Chrissy now too. They're great, and I could not run a comic book store and be able to do these interviews if I didn't have great people working around me, helping me run the store. So that's terrific. I want to thank all of you watching the interviews at home, because that's the point of this, right? And I want to thank all the members of the club too, because if you weren't members of the club, then we would not be able to do these interviews, etc. And I really appreciate it. I really do. Join the club if you're sitting at home and you want to get a brand new graphic novel that's really good every month. Comes with buttons and stickers. We the creators. It's a lot of fun. So check that out. All right. And then last, but maybe not, in fact, definitely not least, I wanna thank cartoonists like Carolyn Palmer right there. Hi, Carolyn. Because if it weren't for you and people like you, I would be sitting in a big store full of blank pages, which would not be very much fun at all. I could not do this without you making comics. So thank you so much for doing that. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? Geez, put me back on a one. I'm sorry. I'm a dork sometimes. I always forget these things. The next couple shows. The next show is in 2 Sundays from now. It's the Adult Club. I'm interviewing Simon Roy for his book here, Grizz Grobus, a great piece of science fiction. This is an Adult Club selection. Though there's nothing in here a kid couldn't read probably, but that's the next adult show. The next kid show is in approximately a month from today. It's by Carlos Sanchez. The book is Rune, A Tale of 1,000 Faces. Really, really pretty book. Very nice, kind of muted color scheme, and yeah, you're gonna like this one a lot. And then the adult club for next month is a book called Brittle Joints by Maria Sweeney. She's handicapped and she makes comics, and it's about her experiences. And she's going to be here in person. Actually, we're going to do a live in-person interview. So keep an eye out for that, because this is a really good book, and it's nicely painted, and yeah, it's terrific stuff. So those are the next couple shows. Please come back and watch them all. Otherwise, Carolyn, I want to thank you for your time.
Yeah.
I hope you had fun.
Definitely. I had a lot of fun. Thank you for talking with me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I love talking about comics. It's the easiest thing in the world to do.
Same.
Favorite thing to talk about.
Yeah. And it's just such a great form of expression, and I have so much admiration for people who do it. So anyway, that's what I got. Thank you so much. And you at home, we'll talk to you in 2 weeks or next month. See ya. Thank you for watching this episode of the Graphic Novel of the Month Club. If you enjoyed what you were watching, please subscribe and hit that bell up in the top corner. If you enjoyed the books that we're talking about and the creators that we're talking to, every month we pick a brand new book. The staff votes on it. It's a program that helps keep our store alive, and we'd love to have you as a member. You'll get a new book every month. Just follow that URL at the bottom of the screen.